Today everyone, in this video we're going to talk about the nature and types of communication. But before that, let's discuss what communication is. Communication is a systematic process through which individuals interact through symbols to create and interpret meaning. It is also the act of sharing of ideas among a group of people, as well as imparting concepts to an audience. It is also worth noting that communication is the act of conveying or sending a message to others. When we say that communication is a systematic process, it means that in order for communication to be effective, it needs to follow a set of rules and guidelines for people to understand each other. As such, we're able to establish that communication takes place between a sender and a receiver, wherein the sender is able to send the messages to the receiver, and the receiver then gives feedback to the sender. Furthermore, another communication characteristic is that it uses symbols. Symbols such as letters, numbers, and different punctuation marks allow people to communicate effectively through different means, different forms, and different media. And lastly, communication is done in order to create and interpret meaning. In communication, creating and interpreting meaning is to ensure that the receiver is able to fully understand the message that the sender intends to deliver. Next, communication is a way of sharing of ideas and experiences among a group of people, as well as imparting concepts to an audience. This means that communication involves having meaningful interactions with other people through active exchange of ideas and experiences. In line with this, communication tends to become more meaningful and engaging if the ideas shared are relevant to the parties involved. And lastly, communication is the act of conveying or sending a message to others. It is worth noting that the most basic definition of communication is sending a message to other people. As such, communication may take different forms such as the smell of burning rice, smiling at someone, newspaper advertisements, black smoke, writing a letter, and talking on the phone. These are all examples of communication because these all convey a message to other people. At this point, we're going to talk about the different features of communication according to businessmanagementideas.com. First, communication is a two-way process. For communication to happen, it must be between two or more individuals. As mentioned earlier, it must be between at least one sender and one receiver, wherein the sender is the one responsible for sending the message. The same principle may be observed if there are multiple receivers, wherein the sender is the one responsible for sending a message to these receivers. Next, communication is a continuous process. Communication involves interacting with people by sharing ideas and experiences with each other. As such, for communication to be meaningful, exchange of ideas must be continuous. Given this notion, in a group of people, each particular member has the possibility to play the role of the sender and the receiver, in which they are also sending messages to other people, while at the same time receiving the messages that are sent by the other members of the group. This would reinforce the fact that communication is continuous because each member of the group is able to share and receive information from the other members. Next, communication is a dynamic process. The communication between the sender and the receiver may take various forms and medium depending on the situation. We have to take note that whenever we communicate with people, we have to consider the following things. First is the communicative context or the situation, and second would be the parties involved or the people who we are going to communicate with. Take note that we could communicate with people through sending text messages, sending emails, making phone calls, or even writing a letter. These are all forms of communication that we can use depending on the situation. Another feature of communication is that it is pervasive. Take note that communication takes place at all levels, in all places, at all times. Whether it is in a business meeting, in the playground, or whenever we are riding our car on the road. In all these situations, communication is involved. In business meetings, people use different graphic organizers to deliver their reports as well as share ideas with other members. In playgrounds, children tend to talk to each other in order to express their ideas and express what they want to do. Whenever we ride our car or drive our car outside, we rely on traffic lights to determine whether it's time for us to go or stop. In other words, it is impossible for people to not communicate. Next, communication may be verbal or non-verbal. Communication is not only done through the use of words. Facial expressions and other forms of gestures are also used to convey a message. Hence, we have the notion that actions speak louder than words. Because more often than not, there would be instances wherein even if we are not going to say anything, through the mere expressions of our faces, we're able to send a message. Or even through the use of our gestures, we're able to deliver whether we are in agreement of a particular idea or not. And lastly, communication is goal-oriented. The main purpose of communication is for people to send and receive messages to each other through various forms and means. As mentioned earlier, communication involves two parties, the sender and the receiver. When we say that communication is goal-oriented, it is the responsibility of the sender to send the message to the receiver, who will then send the feedback to the sender. Note that in both instances, it is the responsibility of both parties to establish understanding and comprehension in order for them to understand the message that they are delivering. Otherwise, communication will be considered as ineffective. In a nutshell, communication is characterized as a systematic process, uses a set of signs and symbols, and is used to convey a message. People use communication as a means to send and receive messages with each other. People communicate through the use of words, gestures, or other non-verbal forms. And lastly, for communication to be considered effective, both parties involved, that is, the sender and the receiver, must be able to understand the message being delivered.